Hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast brought to you by Sproutwith.com. I am Vinay Koshi and our guest today is Wayne Mullins. Wayne, we have a bunch of business owners and executives who are listening into the podcast who are really passionate about growing their businesses predictably and helping it get to fulfill its complete potential through empathetic content and conversations that convert. And so having you on, I thought would be a particularly good fit. And I was thinking about our conversation earlier on, where you said when your marketing is set up correctly, you will give time and attention to creating what you would call evangelists. In other words, people who go out and share your message with others. And that got me thinking, and there were a few thoughts that came to mind, but one of which was a conversation I had with a cab driver while I was in Singapore some time ago. The driver said he had been running restaurants in the past, had now taken a break from that, was now an active consultant to restaurant owners, especially those who were launching a restaurant for the first time. And he was moonlighting as a private cab driver. So I was curious and said, the restaurant space in Singapore is pretty competitive. You turn around any corner and you'll find a restaurant. And he said, yes, it was. And I was curious as to what he did to help these restaurant owners. So he said, most of the restaurant owners who were starting out usually came into a big sum of money and would invest in starting a restaurant. But inevitably, they would fail because of a lack of experience and little aptitude for that business. He, however, would help them acquire a number of events or book a number of events before the restaurant actually launched. And he said that really fueled referrals and fueled walk-in traffic as well to really help sustain the business in the long term. And I was thinking about that, and as I thought about word of mouth, I was thinking that people who did that weren't necessarily true believers, as opposed to an evangelist who would not only be a true believer in terms of the brand, but also its product or service, and have changed their habits and worldview to allow for that. Would that be a correct distinction? Because I find a lot of businesses use the terms interchangeably.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on, Vinay. I think that having word of mouth or having a few referrals is a natural byproduct of a good business or a good product or a good service. But when you create evangelists, the term we love to use, it takes it to a different level, because an evangelist, by definition, they go out into the marketplace attempting to convert others to their way of thinking. So there's a difference, I guess you could say, it'd be like the difference between pick any sport, like pick football. So whether American version or non-American version football, pick football. The difference would be everyone can experience the game. You can experience the game through television, or you can experience the game through being there in person in the stands, or you can experience it on the field. And so I like to think of it using that analogy that when you are intentional about creating evangelists, they will go out and do the work on your behalf. And so I think you are right. I think you're spot on. There is a difference. Word of mouth happens as an indirect result, in other words, of a good product, a good service, whereas evangelist going out and sharing is a direct result of what you've intentionally put in place to create those evangelists.
And that would entail a lot of time and effort being spent in furthering a person's journey, as opposed to a lot of the awareness type stuff that a lot of businesses invest in, and then try and jump straight to a sale or a conversion.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think what often happens is, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, or as marketers, we tend to think of marketing as the attraction piece. Our goal is to go out into the world, find out who would be a good fit for our product or service, and get them to pull out their wallet and hand us money or hand the company money. But our definition of marketing is a little bit different in that we believe that marketing is your ability to attract and to keep a customer. And when we say the word keep, we're not just saying keep as in they'll come back occasionally and buy again and again from you. But when we say keep, we mean keep a customer in such a way that we convert them into evangelists for the product, the service, the brand.
And for listeners, Wayne, you are a passionate entrepreneur that's committed to really creating these remarkable experiences. You are the CEO and founder of Ugly Mug Marketing as well. And you've been at this for quite a while, got quite a client base with companies that I think cover something like 11 or more countries, and certainly right across the US as well. Would that be a fair summary of what you do?
Yeah, that's absolutely it. My passion is helping entrepreneurs reach their goals, scale their businesses. It just so happens that the vehicle or the avenue through which we get to do that is typically via marketing. So, yep, you're spot on.
So, Wayne, given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
Yeah, I think my personal area of strength would be in what I call, this is a very technical term here, but identifying low-hanging fruit. Mm-hmm. There's nothing I love more than coming into a business or into a setting, and it's either A, they're struggling, or B, they've reached a point and they know they can scale this, and then helping them identify, helping them find, and then leverage the low-hanging fruit that is often right there. Mm-hmm. They just can't see it.
Okay. And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
I would say the number one thing I think most entrepreneurs, most business owners overlook is clearly identifying the assets that they have at their disposal. So typically when we start talking assets, people think financials, right? They think money in the bank account. They think anything that has dollar signs and commas attached to it. But the reality is, in any business, in any organization, there's far more value in the customer base or in the potential customer base than there is in the bank account, right? It's that old adage that if you could choose between $1 million, the perfect location, or 1,000 hungry, starving people to launch a restaurant, which is better? And so it's that same analogy, it's that same principle applied, I think, across the board in any type of business.
And I'm curious, what would you say, what was the trigger or the incident, if you will, that got you started on this journey of creating these experiences which would wow customers?
Yeah, Vinay, that actually started for me back when I started a separate business. So way back, I started a lawn and landscape company. Mm-hmm. I was very young at the time, started that company, and over the course of a 3-year period, grew that from a startup to a very successful company, which I sold. And I happened to run into the owner of that business about 1.5 years ago. He still has the business. He still had a lot of the same clientele that we had whenever I had the company. And what would happen as a result of growing and scaling that company in just a very mundane industry was we actually started having customers and clients of that business come to me and say, hey, what are you doing to actually scale and grow this business? What are you doing from a marketing perspective to make all of this happen? And to be honest with you, a lot of what was taking place was looking for ways, identifying ways that we could create remarkable experiences for our customers in the lawn and landscape industry, which again, you don't typically think about remarkable experiences in that industry.
Why would you say most companies struggle or fail with their marketing activities?
Number one, I would say, is they grab at anything that passes by. I've seen this firsthand. What happens is the ad rep comes in, or the ad rep calls and says, hey, we're running this great promo this month only. If you buy the spot here, we're going to bonus you this and this. And it sounds too good to be true, but the entrepreneur is so busy putting out all the other fires, right, in their business that they say, okay, that sounds good. Let's run with it. So then the ad rep says, okay, wonderful, great. What do you want us to put? What's the ad going to be? And the entrepreneur says, I don't know, I'm busy right now. Check back with me in a week. So they come back in a week. The ad rep comes back in a week. And has the entrepreneur done anything? No, they've been busy putting out fires and tending to all the other things. And so they tell the ad rep, hey, look, I'm really tied up right now. Why don't you create something, run it by me, and we're going to be good to go with that. And so when I say a marketing mistake that is being made there is, you can't allow the ad reps, you can't allow what's on sale today, you can't allow the latest and the greatest platform to dictate where you invest your marketing dollars. If you find yourself doing that, I can pretty much guarantee that you're not getting good results from your marketing.
What about the internal processes within the business as well? Because trying to create a remarkable experience in the lawn and landscaping space would entail that you're doing things differently as a business, at least in my mind. Would that be correct?
No, you're spot on, Vinay. That's absolutely it. So let me give you an example. I'll share a story from that business. Sure. Because one, it will illustrate how we created these experiences, but two, it also shed some light on that was originally we started out in the residential space. We cut a lot of residential lawns, but I knew in order to grow and scale that business and then be able to sell that business, I needed commercial accounts. I needed lots of contracts so that I could create something of value. And so one of the things that I would do and my team would do in order to scale that business is every single week, we would go to a local donut store and we would buy dozens and dozens of boxes of donuts. And then we had these labels created that was nothing more than our logo, the company logo, and our phone number on it. And we'd stick that label on top of the donut box and it would cover the entire top. So on the top of it, you couldn't see anything else but our logo and our phone number. And then what we would do is we would go into the businesses that we wanted as our clientele. And we would not go in and ask who's in charge of the lawn. We would not go in and ask to speak to the manager. Instead, let's use a restaurant, for example. We would go into the restaurant. We would go back through the kitchen door. This would be when they're prepping the food. So it'd be early in the morning. And we would walk in and we would just say, hey, we brought y'all some donuts. We just want to say, hey, we're a local lawn and landscape company. Just want to drop these off for y'all. That was it. No sales pitch, no who's in charge, no when's the manager going to be in, none of that. And so we would do this over and over again. Now, here's what happened. Over time, Vinay, when the manager would come in and see trash in the lawn, see that the lawn had gotten out of hand, the shrubs were all in disarray. They would come in the back door and they would say to people in the kitchen, have y'all seen the lawn guy? We haven't seen him in a while. Where is he? The lawn looks terrible. It's Friday. It's our busiest day. And the lawn looks terrible. And they would respond, no, we haven't, but there's this company that keeps coming by. Maybe you should give them a call. And so what happened was we actually created Evangelist within all of these companies that would sell for us on our behalf. We never once had to go in and beg and plead and say, can we get an appointment with you? We'd like to talk about our services. None of that happened. But what happened was we built Evangelist by buying donuts.
So if people can, I'm just thinking of restaurants again, a good number of businesses earn referrals through the experiences that they create and they're able to generate a word of mouth campaign. Would it make sense, therefore, to spend the time and the energy to build out a well-defined strategy, much like yourself, as opposed to doing something that worked, but not really focusing in on that and just continuing on with your business processes?
Yeah, I believe if I'm hearing the question correctly, you're asking basically, does it make sense to build out systems and processes around the creation of those evangelists? Yeah, absolutely. A litmus test for anybody listening to go through is simply this. Pull out your financials, look at your marketing budget, and look and see how much of that marketing budget was spent attracting customers and how much of it was spent keeping customers or nurturing customers or intentionally trying to convert existing customers into evangelists for your brand. And here's what I can tell you. I've asked this question literally to hundreds of entrepreneurs. And what I can tell you is that 95+% of your budget is going to be spent on the attraction side. We're giving very little time and attention to the keeping side, to the conversion side. Once they're a customer, converting them into evangelists for our brands. And where we believe that you should start with this, the number one place to start is you're not going to create an evangelist for your company, your organization, your brand, if your product does not at least exceed the expectations, right? So if your product barely meets expectations, your service barely meets expectations, it doesn't matter what else you do, you're not going to get these people to go around talking about you and spreading your message for you. So that's step one. Step one is you have to ensure that your product, your service is at least meeting and slightly exceeding expectations.
Mhm. If the product or service is meeting expectations or hopefully exceeding that, is there anything more that we need to take into consideration? And I'm thinking that it'd be helpful if perhaps I could get your definition of evangelism marketing, if you will, to help clarify it in the minds of listeners.
Sure, absolutely. So what I would say is this, that first of all, most of the time, our product and service isn't as good as we think it is. Mm-hmm. Okay. So Bain and Company, they're a global consulting firm. I think they're based out of the Boston area. They surveyed, I think it was 600 and something small businesses. And they went to them and they said, how would you rate your level of service using this scale? And the scale was like terrible service, mediocre service, average service, good service, great service, superior service. 80% of the businesses surveyed said they delivered superior service, the top-notch level of service. 80% of these 600 businesses. So Bain & Company says, that's very interesting, seems really high. So let's go survey some of the customers from these actual companies, ask them the exact same question. Hey, we know you did business with X company. How would you rate their level of service based on the scale? When they did that, the customers rated those same companies at only 8% provided superior service. So in the minds of the business owners, 80% of them felt like they delivered superior service. In the minds of the customers of those same exact companies, only 8% believe that they actually got superior service. So the place to start, if you're going to create evangelists, we recommend that you think through the product cycle, the sales cycle of your product. How is it packaged? How is it delivered? All of the elements. So go down and make a list. The checkout process, if it's over the phone, what's that process look like? And take a sheet of paper, and down the middle of that sheet of paper, beside each point of contact or beside each point of interaction, whether that's with the person or not, write down what a reasonable customer has the right to expect. So an example would be, if they're going to have to pick up the phone and call, a reasonable customer would expect you to answer the phone in how many rings? 5, 3, whatever that is. Next, shipping. How long does a reasonable customer expect it to take from the time they order to the time the product arrives? Write that down in the middle. Now, here's what you have to do. Go back through the same list of questions you just went through. And on the left-hand side, you're going to write down what it would take to actually not hit expectations. Now, it seems obvious. Okay, if our customers expect us to answer the phone within 5 rings, not hitting expectations is anything less than that. But write it down. Write down not hitting expectations would be making the phone ring 8 times or 10 times before we pick up the phone. Because what happens is we often assume that we're meeting expectations, when in reality, we're not. And then the final step is over on the right-hand side. Go back through that same question, those same questions, every same point of interaction, and say, okay, what does exceeding expectations look like? Jot down the answer. So again, a reasonable person expects 5 rings. So if we answered it in 3 rings, that's exceeding expectations. If the average person expects the package to arrive within a week, we get it there in 3 days, that's exceeding expectations. So that then gives us a litmus test to go through and say, okay, let's now go back and analyze some recent purchases. How do we actually do in light of what we think we do? Are we as good as we say we are? Does that make sense?
Certainly. Yep. So that's trying to match expectations. I'm assuming that would be the base level at which you start with. And there's a fair bit more that needs to go into to get people's worldview to shift and for them to become a true believer.
Yep, absolutely. So number one is you have to consistently exceed expectations. Mm-hmm. The more consistently you exceed those expectations, the more you increase your chances of creating those evangelists. One slight note, and then I'll move to the next part of this. Sure. One slight note is this, that what you do today, if what you do today for those customers exceeds their expectations, over time, those things become expected. In other words, you think about expectations as an escalator that's moving down. So what exceeds someone's expectations today, if you keep doing that exact same thing over and over again, they've come to expect that thing. So you have to raise the bar again to further exceed expectations. So once you're in this habit and in this rhythm of exceeding expectations, the next thing is you have to give them the language to go out and share. In other words, you can't just expect them to know what to go out and say to other people. You have to give them the language that you want used when they do go out and share. And so that would a tactical or specific example of that would be giving them benefits-based language, not feature-based language, but benefits-based language to speak about your product or service. All too often, this from just sales in general, is we tend to think and speak in terms of the features. Mm-hmm. We have to train ourselves to speak in terms of the true benefits. So part of that, if you will, indoctrination process in converting a customer into an evangelist is giving them language that is benefits-based so that when they're in those interactions with other people, they're not speaking to the features. They're instead speaking to the benefits that they're receiving from what it is that we provide. So step one, exceed expectations. Step two, you have to give them the language. And then step three, you have to give them tools that make it easy for them to go share with other people. And so an example of those tools, the simplest, most basic example of a tool that you can give people is if someone's checking out on your website, after they complete the checkout, they go to the thank you page. And you've probably seen this, Vinay. You get to that page and then there's a pop-up that says, hey, share our company with your friends on social media and get X% off your next purchase. That is a tool that makes it easy for people to go share your message. And the other part of that is it has baked in language. In other words, if you do that, if you go share that thing, it automatically populates. So you click, share on social media or share on Facebook or share on Instagram. It automatically puts either the graphic and the text. Like, I just bought this new thing over here. You may be interested, go check it out. So exceed expectations, give them the language, and then give them the tools to go share.
Okay. There's a lot in there. I'm just thinking that in sharing experiences, it's also possible for people who just enjoy the experience to go out and talk about it, which in my mind brings up this idea of word of mouth referrals or conversations. A believer, however, would be very much insistent that this is the very best. And everyone's familiar of the Apple and Android products. Apple products, I for one enjoy it. I enjoy the experience. However, if you look at it, probably Samsung and Android devices perform way better than Apple products. But yet we have such avid fans or believers in Apple products that we would never look at an Android device ever, at least not in the foreseeable future. So, which entails that there's a bit more going on in the heads and minds of people that create that sort of belief in the particular brand or product.
Yeah, you're spot on with that. So when we think about brands and when we think about creating that loyalty for Apple, that really started way back with that campaign, which was think different or think differently, I think was the exact phraseology they used. And that's really when it started for them. So for them, they began positioning themselves. That was for creatives. It was for people who wanted to push and challenge the status quo. And here's what they did though. In doing that, they created a nemesis for themselves, if you will. If you think back a little bit after that campaign, I don't know if you remember, I'm a PC, I'm a Mac, those commercials. And so what they're doing is they're contrasting themselves. If you're creative, we're for you. If you're not a creative, if you love spreadsheets, if you love heavy data, we're not for you. And I think often where we run into issues is we're afraid to say who we're not for. Mm-hmm. We're afraid that by saying those things, we're going to ostracize or eliminate a certain audience. But you can't stand for something if you don't stand against something else. Apple stood for something which by default meant they stood against something else, if you will. And one other note just to think about, in the kind of birth of Apple, the Apple that we know today, you have to go back to the iPod. That's really the beginning of this transition for Apple. So that was pre-iPad, that was pre-iPhone, that was the original device. Now, when Apple came to the marketplace with that device, they were not the first to the marketplace. Sony already had something. There was, I think RCA already had some digital player. There was a lot of them in the marketplace. And then Microsoft had just launched theirs. Microsoft spent, I don't remember the amount of money. It was either hundreds of millions or maybe low billions of dollars launching the Microsoft Zune, Zune.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that, but
I do.
Yeah. So they launched it. And if you go back and look at the initial campaigns between those two things, the Zune was pictured in magazines. It showed the device, and then it had all these tech specs around it. So it was like X megabytes of memory. It had all this stuff listed. The Apple campaigns, by contrast, showed a silhouette of someone dancing with white headphones. And the only thing other than the Apple icon was simply the words, 1,000 songs in your pocket. That was it. Now, here's the thing that we don't think about when we think about all of that. So all that's great. All that's brilliant. Apple's brilliant at positioning. We get that. But what Apple did that by default built evangelists for them was the color of their headphones. Up until that point, no one had white headphones, right? So back then, everything was corded. And so anytime you saw somebody with the white cords, you knew that was an Apple product. And so on busy subways, walking down the street, in parks, in restaurants, in office buildings, they created evangelists that were able to identify themselves and find each other. So one Apple person would go talk to another Apple person, all based on the color of the headphones. So for us, that's a tough one. That's a high bar to live up to. But we have to look around and not see what are our competitors doing. As you mentioned very early on in our conversation, it's about being different. It's about standing out in the crowded marketplace. And at the end of the day, that is what marketing is about. Effective marketing is about standing out.
Okay, excellent. I'm trying to bring this to more of an application to our own businesses. Is there, I guess, more of a well-defined framework that you talk clients through in terms of applying this lens to various touch points, be it social media content or websites and other things as well?
Yeah, there is. So the framework that we like to use, we call it the natural progression. And the reason we call it that is because it is the natural way that every single human being on the face of the earth buys a product or service. It's rooted in basic psychology. And there's certain psychology that every single person goes through up until the point where they pull out their wallet. And so let me just briefly explain that framework for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you would just think for a second about a clock, an old circular analog clock hanging up on the wall. It's got the hour hand, the minute hand, the second hand. So at the 12 o'clock spot on that clock would be what we would call strangers. So that's anybody out in the world that we believe could be a good fit for our product or service. Those are strangers. Over at 3 o'clock, we have friends. So friends are people who know about us. They like a little bit about what we do, although they don't know enough at that point to pull out their wallet. Then down at 6 o'clock, we have customers, and that's the point of transaction, right? So when we think of marketing, that's where we're trying to get people to go. Okay. Now, to move people from strangers to friends, so from the 12 o'clock to the 3 o'clock spot, there's 1.5, I'll say, elements required. Number one, they have to know about you, right? The strangers have to know about you, which is super obvious, in order to become friendly with you. And they also have to semi what you stand for. They don't have to love you. If you sell organic grass-fed beef, someone who's vegetarian is probably not going to like your company. That's okay. So they have to like you to keep moving through this cycle. And then to move from friends, which is at 3 o'clock, down to customers, the big element there is trust. You have to build trust. Now, when we think about that basic side of the framework, that is the attraction side. So we go from everyone in the world we believe to be a good fit to creating friends, people who know
Yeah.
about us, who like us, to customers, they pull out the wallet. Then over at 9 o'clock, we have evangelist. So in order to move somebody from a customer to evangelist, we talked about that earlier. We like to just say love is required, right? It's beyond just liking. They have to love what you stand for, what you do, the benefits they've received. And when you create those evangelists, you're able to bypass the entire top portion of the clock, because the evangelists at 9 o'clock go over and tell their friends at the 3 o'clock portion about how great you are. They defer or infer some of their trust, some of their liking onto their friends. And I think where we get in trouble as marketers specifically is that we demand too much from one individual campaign. In other words, we put a campaign up and we expect it to take people from stranger all the way to pulling out their wallet and handing us money.
Yep.
And so what we say is, instead, let's break down our campaigns into some basic things. Number one, what campaign can we run to get strangers to know about us? Number two, what campaign can we run to then get those strangers to like us more, to become more friendly towards us? And then number three, what campaign can we run to build trust with those people? So whereas before, when we come in and start working with clients, their mindset is, I want the campaign that we're going to run that's going to take all these people out here and have them show up at our door, or have them pull out their wallet and hand us money. And instead, we step back and say, okay, let's break it down into the psychology, the actual process that people go through: knowing, liking, trusting. Then comes out the wallet. Then comes the opportunity to create evangelist.
And of course, underneath all of that is your customer experience and the processes to deliver and exceed on those expectations. That's terrific. So what do those campaigns look like? Are there a couple of examples you could pull out, preferably in the B2B space?
Sure. So let me give you an example just from our company. I'll use something that we've done just to paint the picture for you. So we're, again, B2B. That's what we do. We work with businesses, helping them market themselves. So for us, we have a certain type of client that we like to work with. We work well with a certain type of client. So first of all, that would be our set of strangers, right? So it's not every single entrepreneur in the world. It's a certain type of entrepreneur. We've gotten crystal clear about who that audience is. So the very first thing that we're going to do for that audience is we're going to run something. We're going to run a campaign that is going to get them to pay attention to us, just to be aware that we exist. So a specific example would be where we would go maybe on Facebook and we would run a campaign, and we would specifically target people in that audience. And what we would run is something that we know that they would be interested in, that would just pique their interest in what we would do as an organization. So if that is websites, for example, we would run something that just says, is your website actually producing results for you? Do you know? And then what we would do from there is we would then follow those people up. So the people who we targeted with that campaign, we would follow that up with maybe a video that then builds trust. So a short video that teaches them, shows them how to do a quick analysis of the results that their website is producing. And then from there, what we would do is we'd retarget those people who watch that video with a campaign that's maybe a testimonial from a previous website client, or maybe it's multiple testimonials. So again, we're just thinking through knowing, liking, and trusting. Is that helpful? Or you want me to give you another one, a different one?
Yeah, another one would help, because I'm sure there are people going, that sounds great. How can I apply this to my own business? Another example would certainly help stir the creative juices.
Yeah. So we have a client who is in the space where they teach courses. And so one of our responsibilities is to get people to basically sign up for these courses. So initially what we tried to do was we tried to run some lead gen campaigns, driving leads into a funnel, the traditional, what you think of as lead gen approach, funnel approach. Yep. And the cost per lead was, I think, $13 to $15 a lead, in that range. Instead, what we did was we shifted the funnel. And the very first thing we did was we ran a campaign that spoke to their needs. So the specific need of this audience. And it was a video that was strictly educational. So basically, did X, Y, and Z, and here's how to fix that problem for your organization. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And so we ran that video, and we ran it to their targeted audience. And then what we did was we came back and we retargeted. In other words, we ran an ad just to people who had watched at least 50% of that video. Mm-hmm. That second ad that we ran, which was the lead gen ad, was the same exact ad that was previously generating leads in that $13 range. Mm-hmm. The leads now were less than $3 a lead. So we ran this video educating people. We then retargeted the people who watched at least 50% of that video. And now the cost per lead was less than $3 per lead.
Mm-hmm. So you've got people to know and like you and trust you to pull out their wallet and buy, or certainly engage in the sales process. What do you do to move them further out into the evangelist area?
Yeah. So again, for us, it's being clear that we are exceeding expectations. Mm-hmm. And we work with clients a lot on that. We live in a world where every single person is now their own media company. So you think about it, anyone with a smartphone at any point in time can post something on any social platform. Mm-hmm. They can leave a review on a myriad, from Yelp to Trustpilot to Amazon to you name it. There's a place they can leave a review. So in everyone's pocket is the power to influence others. Mm-hmm. And so the question simply becomes, are you creating experiences that are worth sharing, or are you not? And it has to be an intentional conversation. It has to be an intentional thing. This for us is part of who we are. It's part of how we think through the process with our clients. So we work, for example, with the travel agent. So they do still exist. Mm-hmm. This travel agent, she does very high-end custom travel. So think of it much more as a travel concierge, if you will. And so when we're working with her, we begin engineering the process all the way back through the first interaction. What do we do with that first initial interaction with those people to make it a remarkable experience? So remarkable is a tricky word. Remarkable means worthy of remark. So we can say we're remarkable, but was it actually worthy of remark? So we walk her through, what are the things that they could leave with, or what are the things that, if it's virtual, what are something that you could send them so that when it arrives, it's worthy of remark? Not once they book a trip, not once they come back from the trip, but after that initial conversation. It's going through your entire process and looking for the points that you can engineer remarkability into. And they exist. It doesn't matter the business, it doesn't matter the industry. Those points do exist.
So I'm curious, for this particular individual, what was it?
So for this particular individual, it's been we've changed it, we varied it, we've changed it up. At one point, it was a very custom luggage tag, a very nice custom luggage tag. She's also done so before, whenever she would send them like their trip itinerary, it would go either digitally or it would just be printed and stuck in like a FedEx envelope and mailed that way. So we engineered it into a tube, like a mailing tube. Mm-hmm. And then we got this really cool, unique tape that gets wrapped around it that looks like passport stamps from around the world. Right. And then inside of that, we redesigned her entire itinerary to almost look and feel like an old vintage map. So again, now you take something that used to come in a FedEx envelope, they open, it's great, all the information is there. And we've turned that one little thing into an experience for those people.
And I take it that you would then get people sharing that experience on social media, and that's where the evangelist, or at least the evangelist side of things really come to light.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's the beginning. So again, we're looking for all these various points along the way where we can add in these touch points. So for that same client, just another example for that same client, another thing that we've done for her is we've done physical newsletters that get mailed out to, prospects, people who've had conversations with her and or previous clients. And at one point we did where we use wax seals on them to seal them, actually put a stamp on the wax seal and mailed those to people. Another time we actually took and put, I think it was for a trip to France maybe, and there was like wine glass stains intentionally placed on the pieces. So it's all these little pieces and components that again, we're looking for ways to create that experience, something worthy of remark.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, would you say that there are almost two categories of evangelists, one being within the brand itself and the other outside, but both sharing their experiences and both being true believers to the cause?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely that. So there's people who've done business with you, right? They've given you money in exchange for whatever it is that you offer, and they love you so much that they're going out and sharing. But then there are those who maybe have never done business with you at all, who you can turn into evangelists for your brand. So I'll give an example from our situation, from our own company. We do a physical print newsletter. Right now, it's actually, it looks like a newspaper. It's actually numerous pages. It's an actual newspaper. But back in the early days, it was just printed on, a large sheet of paper, folded, mailed to people. We would send this to people who we had any interactions with. There was a gentleman that would never do business with us. He was just a nice gentleman, respected in the community, but we continually would send him the newsletter. We would send him, like if there was a book that we were reading that we enjoyed, we'd send him a copy of the book. And this gentleman began referring people to us just through his connections. He's never, to this day, so 12 and a half years later, he's never spent a dime with us. He's not in a type of business or organization that needs what we offer. But that one gentleman has probably referred to us, it'd be at least hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of business. And so he's an evangelist who's never pulled out his wallet and given us any money.
You raise an interesting point there, because there are newsletters for just about every company, at least. Every company has a little pop-up or a form on their website that suggests that people subscribe to their newsletter. How have you created something that's worthy of opening, because inboxes can get quite messy and busy, and speaking to the right kind of audience?
Sure. An example of that for us would be this: when everyone else is doing A, we choose to do B. So our newsletter isn't in the inbox. Our newsletter is actually tangible, a thing that gets mailed. Right. And so often we play copycat, right? As entrepreneurs, we're notorious for looking around and saying, oh, they're doing this, so it must be working. So let's do that same thing, but let's do it a little bit better. And if your whole game is to do something a little bit better than the competitor and hope to win, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're never going to win the game that way. Yeah, you may edge them out for a little bit, but then they're going to see what you've done and they're going to say, oh, let's do what they've done just a little bit better. So it's this never-ending battle we create for ourselves. Yeah. What instead we need to do is say, okay, how do I take this to a completely different place? How do I remove myself from this competition and play a different game? I think what happens is we look around people and we confuse the asset with the action. So we see them doing the newsletter thing. We see that action, but we don't look and see what's the asset underneath that. So the asset underneath that would be the list, right? That's the asset underneath that. That's why we do that. It's the relationships. And so it varies based on the business, but not everyone's good at writing. Not everyone's good at video. Not everyone's good at social media. You name it. It may not be in your strength, your company's strength, your organization's strength. Instead, look to what your strengths are. Play to those strengths, but build the assets that you need to build. Be focused on the assets, not on the actions.
Would you say that for the assets to be built out and really to avoid this copycat type of thinking, businesses should get comfortable with who they are and their own unique personalities and way of looking at the world, as opposed to trying to copy Joe down the road and whatever he or she is doing?
Yeah, no, I absolutely completely agree with that. I'll just tell you this. So part of our business is doing custom websites. The number one referral source for us for websites are the competitors of the people who call us. The phone typically rings. The person on the other side says, hey, we're interested in a website for our organization. We say, okay, great. And later on in the conversation, so what led y'all to this decision that now's the time? Our competitor just got a new website. And so we've got to be very careful that we're not making decisions just based on what we see taking place in our industry or in our competitive field, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. How would you recommend people get comfortable with their own personality and tone of voice?
Yeah, that's, to be honest with you, Vinay, that's a very tough one to do, right? Because we go around looking around, right? We want to see what our competitors are doing. We want to make sure we're aware of what's going on around us. And although our intentions aren't necessarily to copy what they're doing, by default, we pick up on what they're doing. And that dangerous thing comes back and says, oh, they're doing it, so we should probably be doing it as well. To be comfortable in who you are as an organization, you must first understand, one, where you're going as an organization, which is the vision. Where are we aiming to go with this organization? The next part of that is like the mission. In other words, how are we going to go about getting to that place? What is the mission that we're on to get to that place of vision? Without identifying the vision for where you want to go and the mission on how you're going to go about getting there, I don't think you can clearly articulate the voice of the organization, of the company. I think what starts bubbling out of that would be the core values. It would be, what do we stand for? What are our guard posts along the way, our guardrails along the way to help us get to that destination? Because it's out of those things, in other words, out of the core values that arise during that process, it's those things that give us the language. And language is declarative, like language creates things. And it's out of that language that the voice is found. So it's work. And I don't know that I could articulate a specific exercise other than it emerges out of this other work.
Would I be right in saying it's an ongoing piece of work as well?
Absolutely. Because an organization is, in many ways, it's a quote unquote living, breathing organism, right? It's this thing that evolves as the marketplace changes, you change, as the world changes, the organization changes. And so your voice will change over time. Your voice will resonate differently over time.
So your product or service, in thinking about successful evangelism, really stands at the core of the whole process. Would that be correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And I guess another thing I'd like to clarify is there's a term being used, brand ambassador. Are brand ambassadors necessarily evangelists?
When I think of the term brand ambassador, I think of someone who's proud of your brand, right? They're proud to say that they're associated with you, that they use your product, et cetera. I think, again, evangelist goes a bit further because an evangelist is out to convert other people. So even within organizations, we'll go back to your example of Apple earlier. There are people who are brand ambassadors for Apple. There are people who are just regular customers for Apple, but there are people out there who are evangelists for Apple, right? They're the people who, when someone posts something positive about Android, they're on there bashing why Android's not that great. Or when someone posts something negative about Apple, they're on there defending Apple in those forums and all those places online. So I think you can have both. I think if you think of it in terms of, you can have different levels of customers for your organization. So you can have customers who will do business with you one time. You can have customers who will do business with you occasionally. You can have customers who will do business with you all the time. So in that same vein, I think you can have these different levels of people who are out there sharing on your behalf.
Excellent. Wayne, I think we've covered a fair bit around this topic of evangelism and evangelism marketing. Is there other things that we should touch upon but haven't quite highlighted as yet?
Yeah, I would just say that when it comes to your product, the service, the thing that you provide, we often think of this term of product market fit, right? So like, where does our product, where does our service, where is the thing that we provide, where does it fit in the marketplace? And what I think we get ourselves in trouble is when we think of that term, what that means is we've bought into a certain product or service. In other words, we've sold ourselves on this is the thing that the market needs. Now it's just a matter of figuring out where it fits in the market. I think a better mentality is, instead of product market fit, it's problem market fit. And what that means is we need to figure out what market we're passionate about serving, and then figure out what are the problems that those people have, and how do we fit in, or how can we fit in to solving those problems. Now, again, it's within the parameters of what it is that you do, right? So we work, I'm just going to use this example. We work with clients primarily in kind of the marketing world. I know for a fact, a lot of our clients have issues in the financial side, getting their financials in order, or getting their QuickBooks set up correctly, or whatever it may be in that area. That's not a problem that we're in the position to go help figure out and solve. So you have to match that with what it is, your skill set, your organization skill set. But I think we have to be careful that we don't hold on so closely to what we believe the marketplace wants. Instead, stay focused on the problems that we're trying to solve.
That's an excellent point. Wayne, this has been terrific. If you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I think my top takeaway is this, that marketing does not have to be complex or complicated. Mm-hmm. It's ourselves that often make it that way. Yeah. If we would literally, like, you don't have to use what I presented today, but if you will literally just step back and say, what are the natural steps that people go through when they make a purchasing decision? And then break those into individual components, and then market to each of those components as they move through your sales cycle or through your buying cycle. Mm-hmm. That in and of itself will completely transform the results you get from your marketing.
Wayne, if listeners are curious and wanted to know more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Sure, Vinay. The simplest place is just on our website. That's just uglymugmarketing.com. Mm-hmm. My email address, phone numbers, all our social media links are there. So that's the simplest place.
Excellent. Wayne, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Vinay. I've enjoyed our time together.